Have you ever really stopped to think about what keeps a company running day to day? It's not always about those huge headline-grabbing profits or massive investment rounds. Nope, it's about something much more fundamental, having the fuel for the daily grind. Today, we're going to unlock the concept of working capital, what I like to call the financial engine that powers a business. All right, let's get into it.
So, let's start with the most basic question of all. To run your business, you've got to pay your people, you need to buy inventory to sell, and you have to give your customers a little time to pay you. All of those things tie up cash. So, where does that money actually come from? How do you fund the very heartbeat of your company?
Now, if you crack open any accounting textbook, you are going to see this exact formula. You can see it here. Working capital equals current assets minus current liabilities. And look, technically, it's correct. It spits out a number. But honestly, if you're a manager trying to make real decisions, this formula on its own, well, it's not all that helpful, is it?
I mean, what does that number actually mean for the business and the real world? It kind of feels like a leftover figure, doesn't it? Just some accounting result. It doesn't really give you any gut feeling, any intuition about your financial strategy or the health of your operations. We need a better way to look at this.
So, let's do that. Let's shift our perspective. We're going to move away from the pure accounting definition and look at this from a more strategic, financial point of view. And trust me, this is where working capital starts to make a whole lot more sense.
Okay, this is where it gets really cool. Forget that old formula for a second. Think about it like this. Your business has a big pot of long-term money, right? That's your equity, your long-term loans, what the slide calls recursos permanentes, or permanent resources. Now, the first thing you do with that money is buy your long-term stuff. Your factory, your equipment, the activo fijo. And the money that's left over after you've paid for all that, that is your working capital. And this diagram just illustrates that point perfectly. Look on the left, you've got your day-to-day operational assets. Caja is cash, clientes is what your customers owe you, and inventorios is your inventory. Then on the right, you see how it's all funded. That slice labeled capital de trabajo, working capital, that's the piece of your permanent long-term funding that's set aside specifically to support these short-term needs.
And this is the big aha moment. It's so important. While a single item in your inventory or one customer invoice is definitely short-term, the need to have inventory and receivables is absolutely permanent. It's constant. The second you sell a product, you've got to buy another one to replace it. That means your money is always tied up or trapped in the company. It's a long-term investment in your operations. And that is why it makes total sense to fund it with stable, long-term capital.
Okay, so we get where the funding comes from now. But that's only half the story. The other, maybe even more important question is, how much funding do our operations actually need? This brings us to our next key idea, the NOF, or Operating Fund Requirements.
So here's some good news. You don't actually have to fund every single penny yourself. Your business, just by operating, generates some of its own financing. Think about it. When your supplier gives you 30 or 60 days to pay an invoice, they're basically giving you an interest-free loan for that period. We call these spontaneous resources.
And this brings us right to the NOF. To figure out how much cash you really need to come up with, you take your total current assets, all that inventory and receivables, and you subtract out that free financing you get from your suppliers. What's left over? That's your NOF. That is the true number, the actual funding gap that your operations create.
This diagram just lays it all out so clearly. You can even see the formula right there at the bottom. The NOF is your current assets, activo corriente, minus those recursos espontáneos, the spontaneous resources we just talked about. The NOF is that leftover gap. It's the amount of money you have to actively go out and find a source for, whether that's your long-term capital or maybe some short-term debt.
All right, so now we know the need. We have our number, the NOF. Now comes the really fun part for any manager, the big strategic question. How are we going to fund it? This is where you have to make some pretty critical choices. I love this slide because it frames it perfectly. Your NOF, how much money you need, that's the question you have to solve. And the answer? Well, the answer is your unique blend of CT, which is working capital, and deuda CP, which stands for short-term debt. It's a strategic choice, a balancing act between stability and flexibility. So what's the trade-off here? Well, on one side, you've got working capital. Think of that as your stable, structural, less risky foundation. It's solid. On the other side, you've got short-term debt, like a bank line of credit. That's super flexible, great for temporary needs, but it's also a bit riskier and it can be more expensive. Okay, this theory is great and all, but let's make it real. How does this whole balancing act actually play out in a couple of very common business scenarios? Let's talk about seasonality and high growth.
Okay, take a look at this top graph. Imagine you sell ice cream. Your need for funds, your NOF, is going to shoot way up in the summer, right? The smart way to handle that is to cover your baseline year-round need with that stable working capital. Then, for that temporary summer peak, you use flexible short-term debt, which you can pay right back once the season is over. Makes sense.
Now look at the bottom graph. This is a totally different story. This is a company that's growing fast. As their sales go up and up, their whole baseline need for funding, their NOF, is shifting upwards permanently. You can't fund permanent growth with temporary debt. It's just not sustainable. So this company has to strategically increase its permanent working capital. And this doesn't happen gradually. It happens in big steps, like when they get a new round of investment or take out a major long-term loan.
So, let's bring it all home with a question for you. Think about your own business or one you follow. When you look at its next big challenge, whether that's a crazy busy season or a massive growth plan, how are they planning to fund it? You have to understand your real operational need, your NOF, and then make a very deliberate choice. Are you building on a solid, stable foundation, or are you just using temporary fixes for what might be a permanent need?